And away we go. Alright then, so let's see what's going on in the news this evening. Top EU official warns the US against interfering in Europe's affairs. On Monday, European Council President Antonio Costa condemned the national security strategy published last week, saying, "What we cannot accept is the threat to interfere in European politics." The national security strategy said the US would be cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations and criticized European free speech and migration policies, warning of civilizational erasure risks. Costa told a conference in Brussels and Paris the United States cannot replace European citizens in choosing which parties are good and which are bad, and warned that freedom of speech depends on freedom of information. Moscow publicly welcomed the document while the European Commission's Friday fine on Twitter X fueled US criticism, intensifying transatlantic tensions. Costa added that Europe must be sovereign and strong at home, stressing, if you want to be strong on the international stage, you have to be strong at home, and warned the Ukraine strategy undermines Europe's peace goals. Now this is when things are going to get juicy. Because, and I know everyone's going to have their own opinions on this, however, what from this particular story, the EU are, of course, concerned about the US and Donald Trump, as they always are, because Europe, the European Union, doesn't want anything to do with anything that's outside the so-called Western ideology. In regards to, uh, for a second there I was going to say something about Ukraine, but I don't see Ukraine mentioned here whatsoever. I don't have, well, I do have opinions about the European Union, but even I do have concerns about how the EU is operating and whatever bureaucracy and legislation bodies and committees that the EU has, there has been at times good things coming out of the EU, especially development, infrastructure development within the smallest EU nations like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Cyprus, Malta, and to some extent Poland, back when its economy wasn't so big, but now Poland's economy is slightly larger than the EU average, so good on Poland. Yet, when it when the EU goes out against Russia, the US, not surprised. I know that the EU has, I wouldn't say an agenda against Russia, but of course, the EU don't want to be too reliant on Russia for its oil, its energy, anything trade related. Fair enough. If the EU doesn't want to do trade with Russia, they don't have to. But even then, no matter how hard the EU tries to not let Russia get the upper hand on anything, there's always going to be other big nations like the US, South Africa, Brazil, the existence of BRICS. They'll do what they can to ensure that whatever countries have the potential to steer and make shift how society moves forward, that country in particular is the country that is moving the world forward. Right now, as of this recording, the United States, being the country with a massive economy and a military, they're they're the ones that gets involved in everything, and any trade deals that they do with other countries, those countries benefit massively. But of course, just like with the rise of AI, you can never be too reliant, and you shouldn't be too reliant on doing trade with one nation and one nation only, even if there is so much benefit coming from that country. I'm not saying cut ties with our country, even if it is beneficial. You can continue doing trade with our country if you want to. However, don't always only do trade with that country. You gotta diversify your other trade agreements and diplomatic relations too. That's also important. What if what if one country and another country have a fallout? They say, we're not going to do trade with you anymore. Which countries is that country going to do trade with? That's what I always think about with anything really. Yes, having one connection is very good, but it's not enough. And even with all the connections, how much do they benefit you? The relations you have with these people, how much do they benefit you? As a whole, that is worth noting. Duly so. Norway police say suspect detained in shooting at shopping centre. No injuries immediately reported. On Monday, a single shot struck the ceiling inside Storo Storsenter shopping centre, Oslo, prompting authorities to evacuate the centre shortly after 11 a.m. and detain a teenager. Detectives said the suspect phoned police claiming he had a gun, and police later revealed the call preceded the gunshot, according to local media at Storsenter shopping centre, Oslo. Officers recovered a shotgun, a bag of ammunition, and a bag containing a knife, and a baseball bat near the suspect. While police search teams found no injured people. A sustained police presence, include squad cars and a helicopter, remained at Storsenter as Oslo police secured the area, declared it safe, and reopened the centre while urging people to stay away from emergency services. Oslo Police Operations Chief Tor Grotum said the incident was very serious and the rapid response likely prevented injuries, recalling the June 2022 shooting that killed 2 and injured 9. Wow. Shooting in a shopping centre in Norway. Usually, stuff like that happens in the United States, but Norway? Dang. That is... Firstly, it's very awful that anyone was to be caught in crossfires like that, or even be in the same place as someone who could have been unalive. Hopefully that everyone that was there is safe, and they are, and certainly not injured, thankfully. However, this is only the beginning, and I'm not saying this will happen again. However, what would happen if it did? What happened if it does? What would be the protocol, the response? What's the root issue in all of this? Why are the teenagers shooting up in shopping centres to begin with? That shouldn't be happening. What are these people thinking? Just thinking they could just go shooting around like bang, 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 and then scaring people. Now, of course, there will be people that will point fingers at mass migration. Well, it's not wrong, but we can't just always point fingers at mass migration into Norway as being the sole reason why shooting like this happens to begin with. Because even then, this could also happen. The person that was the prime suspect of this could actually be someone who has been born and raised in Norway. I'm just saying it could be possible. And then you have to what has this person been taught as a young child? How were these people raised? How could they behave in such a way that scares people and ignites violence and could be a threat to people's lives? Either way, hopefully something like that doesn't happen again, not just in Norway, but anywhere in Europe. Now, I'd say the same for the United States as well. Shootings like that shouldn't happen at all to begin with, years ago. But of course, there are people of a certain capacity that do roam about in public, and we do not question what people's motives are to doing such actions like this. They really don't. Finch West LRT opens with free rides as TTC launches first new transit line since 2002. The Finch West LRT, a 3-kilometer line with 18 stops, opened on Sunday with 3 rides for the day. Construction began 7 years ago, but faced delays due to political debates, funding shifts, and issues. Doug Ford celebrated the opening, saying it took the whole city and part of the province to get this going. Right. Now, of course, it's just media trying to be positive. I can't argue that. We need some positivity in every now and then. However, for some reason, although I don't have any interest looking up on transit in Canada or even what goes on in Ontario, and especially don't have any interest in Doug Ford, but from what I've heard from the aforementioned concepts and entities, why the long face? About time, they say. How could you? Now, again, I don't think Canada is as. I think Canada is on the same level as the US in terms of how to approach with public transportation. So there's not much to complain there. But of course, we do have to point it out. And I'm not saying we should have public transportation everywhere, although that would be useful and would certainly help with meeting infrastructure demands and possibly new housing developments in the future. And I know for sure that whilst it does read that Doug Ford does celebrate the opening of the Finch West LRT, for the years since he had ever been the premier of the Ontario province in Canada, I don't I don't believe he's the kind of guy that would advocate for public transit. He'd be more for private ownership, of having your own car, and always have car-friendly streets. That's what I've heard. And look, if Doug Ford wanted to not go ahead with any public transit initiatives, openings, or proposals, he could continue to back that away. But why did he? Why let this go ahead? At least outside of the answer that the majority of Ontario residents have asked for forms of public transit infrastructure upgrades or extensions for a while. But was really the public pressure too much for Doug? Could he not handle it? Those are very important questions that nobody asks all that often. But that is important, absolutely. Carney announces $400 million joint fund with City of Ottawa for affordable housing. On December 8th, 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced the federal government and the City of Ottawa will invest $400 million to build up to 3,000 affordable homes in Ottawa. The City of Ottawa agreed to reduce or waive development charges, permit fees, and property taxes, and priority projects to speed construction and lower local costs. Build Canada Homes, the new federal agency, will finance 2,000 units of federally owned land and 1,000 non-market housing units in Ottawa's portfolio. Carney says construction will begin next year, with officials aiming to break ground then. And the announcement included a $400 million investment, a $1.2 million addiction pilot, and Hiller's appointment. Carney described the approach as a national model, saying fast-tracking approval and building on federal and municipal lands serves as a model for the country. Well, I will say it's good to see that new homes are being built, but of course, just like with the last story, actually no, I don't think I said that in the last story. I think there's something important to mention here. There's this YouTube video I've watched a while ago about how having some kind of housing anywhere is pretty much the at least the lack of housing is pretty much the reason why we have a lot of the problems we have today. And you know what? Most of that is technically true, but of course, housing isn't the only problem that is connected to all other societal problems. Public transit is another thing. And I'm not talking about transportation that is owned by the state or local municipal councils. I'm just talking about transit that members of the public just take from place to place, neighborhood to neighborhood, at whatever price that public transit fares offer for local residents that use such transportation systems. So yeah, if you go anywhere in Europe, public transit is anywhere and everywhere, and you go from neighborhood to neighborhood at 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 a somewhat affordable price. I'm not saying they're all cheap, but they're not all that expensive either. So, and I'm not gonna lie, public transit projects are also happening in the US and Canada as well, but there aren't as many of them. And if there are such projects like that happening, it's only in major cities like New York City, Los Angeles, Seattle, Florida, Houston, Dallas, the big major cities where only public transit projects in the US and even Canada, with Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, Montreal, no other town, no other city or town have any extensive public transit systems in place. And I tried balancing out criticisms and arguments about advocating for and advocating against public transit. I actually seem to lean more towards advocating for more public transit. Now, but not just owned by the state, federal, state governments, but of course, public transit that's ran and operated by local authorities. And if there are any other private companies wanting to provide public transit, I'm all for that too. Just don't make prices too high and do make sure that the vehicles are cleaned thoroughly every now and then. Yeah, just health and safety reasons, I would say that's a priority in my opinion. So yeah, back to the story about $400 million joint fund with City of Ottawa for affordable housing. It's a start, but what is the strong incentive to build these houses, other than the fact we don't have any houses? There has to be a reason to build homes to begin with. Is it close to other businesses? Is it public transit nearby? People that live in whatever areas that will have new homes can then get from neighborhood to neighborhood easily, quickly, and conveniently? Or are they just going to build homes in the middle of somewhere and just hope and just call it a day? Because the latter is a terrible reason. You can't just build homes for you can't just build homes and be with it. There has to be some kind of incentive. There has to be a reason for homes to be built to begin with. And do the people that will potentially live in these new homes, will they benefit from living in that particular part of their country or neighborhood? Will there be businesses nearby, emergency services, and other modes of transit just to get around? That's just very important. There are important points to make out, and those are it. On Monday, enraged farmers swarmed onto the apron at the Nikos Kazantzakis International Airport in Heraklion, evading riot police and forcing the airport to suspend all flights. After revelations of subsidy fraud, protests intensified across Greece as delayed European Union-backed agricultural subsidies followed the resignation of 5 senior government officials and phased shutdown of the state agency handling subsidies. Agricultural subsidies at border crossings. Farmer blockades have already hampered truck traffic and created long backup lines, while police enforced diversions in northern and central Greece. Authorities reviewing subsidy requests have delayed payments, dozens for allegedly filing false claims, while farmers say delays leave honest farmers in debt and unable to plant. Last week, Michaelis Chrysoshodis, Minister for Public Order, said the government remained open to talks with protest leaders, but warned it would not tolerate shutdowns, while Greece's farming sector faces a goat and sheep pox outbreak this year. Greek agriculture is having a very long week. All I ask and hope that farmers in Greece they get the subsidies that they want and they deserve, and of course, farmers in Greece continue to plant whatever crops they believe is best for not just for themselves, but also crops that facilitates the local needs of the people in Greece, because thousands of years agriculture has been and will be very important to the foods that we eat and the produce to a lot of the services and goods that surrounds us. I've said this many times and I will say it again. Do not mess with farmers. The moment you put any higher taxations on the farmers or you tell farmers you can't do this, you can't do that, they will riot. And they will go to government buildings and they will not stop bothering national politicians until whatever legislation that is going to be disadvantaging farmers gets repealed or just scrapped altogether. That's my take from this. Do not mess with farmers. Ever. Now, of course, there should be standards on how you proceed with farming, but at least minimal regulation and standards. Don't do anything too crazy. At least that's how I would put it. Teens worldwide react to Australia's social media ban. A new Australian law restricts social media access for children under 16, and major platforms like Meta, TikTok, and YouTube have agreed to comply. The law aims to address mental health concerns, but some teens argue they deserve to have a say, and have filed a legal challenge. An Australian official has been asked to testify before the US Congress about the law's extraterritorial impact on American free speech. Alright, first off, why do Australian authorities have to go to the United States to talk about a law that applies to Australians to the US Congress? Yeah. Want to hear them out? Yes, go ahead. It'd be great to have an understanding of what goes on. And, of course, understand more about what goes into the social media ban for Australians under 16s. But still, the fact that an official in Australia, closely tied to the social media ban, that is yet to be put in place, has to testify before the US Congress about the law that's going to apply to Australians and how the law goes against American free speech. Goodness, look, the United States, they're always getting themselves involved in anything and everything, even if it's not going to impact them whatsoever. Yet they're still gonna get them. still, the US is always going to find ways to get themselves involved in global conflicts, social issues, legislations that puts limitations on how we speak, whilst valid points to make. However, how are you going to ask an Australian official to testify before the US Congress about how a law that is yet to be passed in Australia have an impact on American free speech if the said law doesn't apply to Americans, it applies to Australia? The only argument in defense of this could be that a lot of the major platforms that people in Australia are using are based in the United States. That's that's the only defense that could be provided to ask an Australian official to testify before US Congress about the under 16s social media ban, because the United States is the country that headquarters a lot of the major social media platforms. Well, TikTok is a bit of a grey area because originally it's Douyin, but TikTok is the international equivalent of Douyin, based in China. But why isn't China asking Australian officials to testify before China about this law? I'm not saying that will happen. I'm just saying that. Then again, actually no, I don't know why I'm going with that. But yeah, honestly, if this law is going to go ahead in Australia, it has to be made clear on the policing on users. How would moderators at these social media platforms tell if someone's of above a certain age? And what would happen if people find out that these users are not old enough to use social media? And even if something is done about that, would they be able to make a social media account at a time they are old enough to be on social media? It's just, yeah, it is what it is, it was what it was, so on and so forth. IDF chief says Yellow Line in Gaza is a new border. On December 7th, 2025, General Ilal Zamir, IDF Chief of Staff, declared the Yellow Line a new border during visits to Beit Hanun and Jabalia, northern Gaza. Under the US brokered plan, the IDF withdrew in October to the Yellow Line, leaving Israel controlling roughly 53% of Gaza, while Stage 2 deployment remains stalled. The IDF reports that it has continued operations, killing over 370 Palestinians since October 11th. Although it was October 7th. Anyway, well, Gaza residents report killings beyond the unmarked yellow line. The IDF warned it is preparing for surprise attack scenarios and multi-year readiness, while Stage 1 remains incomplete until Ran Givili, deceased Israeli hostage, is returned. The statement signals that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doubts an international force can disarm Hamas and plans to raise Stage 2 with former US President Donald Trump later this month, while the chief's wording suggests Israel will not withdraw from the Yellow Line. I'm just done. Honestly, I cannot stress enough that what's going on in Gaza has been going on for far too long. And whatever people have about Israel and the idea, so what? What about now? What's been done now to ensure that we continue living in peace? And even when you bring up the facts about history that goes back thousands of years, why does that matter now? How is it relevant to how we're dealing with the situation in regards to the current state of Gaza? And whilst there are genuine concerns about Hamas, that are currently governing Gaza, and of course they are causing havoc within Gaza. This doesn't mean that Israel and or the IDF are off the hook. They too have been in hot water themselves. I'm just done with this conflict. No, I'm done with this genocide. I'm done with the unaliving of people. I am done with people being held hostage for ransom or to get whatever negotiations that kidnappers are wanting to get from others. And I'm especially done with all the hate and all the online social media trolls that try to rile up one side or the other just for the sake of getting them triggered. There are lines that shall not be crossed. And ever since October 7th, that has been crossed many times. You are entitled to your opinions, but whatever you do, never stoop to the level of your enemies, and especially do not stoop to the same level of the people that you are saying are the bad guys who are causing this problem to begin with. That will not get anywhere, and there will certainly be things that are far beyond our control. But out of the things you can control, do the best you can. Because it is better to do something than to do nothing at all. So might as well as start from square one and do the best we can to make this world a better place. To show our descendants that what happens at this time many years ago, well, there is still hope. There was still hope back then, as they are today, as if it's a few years from now. We've got to keep going, no matter what. AI versus AI. Patients deploy bots to battle health insurers that deny care. Several businesses and non-profits launched AI-powered tools to help patients appeal denials and pass bills. While Sheer Health, a 3-year-old company, offers an app with AI plus human support for claims. In recent years, as insurers turned to AI to automate claims processing, denial rates rose, with nearly 1 in 5 in-network claims denied in 2023, and providers reporting more frequent denials. Earlier this year, Matthew Evans learned 48 hours before his scheduled back surgery that his insurer wouldn't cover it, and his physician-led appeal failed. Then Share Health identified a coding error and secured surgery approval about 3 weeks later. 3 weeks. Experts and lawmakers argue a human must review AI-driven decisions, as consumers rarely appeal denials and patients lose over half of appeals, while observers warn patients may miss AI errors. United Health Group faces scrutiny over algorithms alleged to deny care, while America's health insurance plans say health plans are committed to responsible AI use, and state legislators scramble to keep pace. Goodness me. So, more recently, there's more health insurance denials than there were before because health insurance companies have turned to AI to process approval for health insurance plans, or at least to say, I'm getting the surgery, I hopefully my insurance can cover this, if it will. And then health insurance companies say, nope, we can't do that. But it's not a human that said that, it was AI. And that's a problem. It's always been a problem. Not just with health insurance, but the fact that people have been so lazy, they now turn to AI to automate the work for them. And also to save money, because Why would you pay AI to do the work that other humans can? It's not like the AI has a life outside of work and has a home to go to, has a family to be appreciated by, and has a third place to hang out with his buddies. No, AI doesn't do that. All it cares about and can only focus on is work. Work, work, work. And work. Did I say work? I think I said work. Oh, well, all I will say is, if any AI capabilities are to be put in place, yeah, I agree with the experts and lawmakers that all humans should be reviewing any AI-driven decisions because there could be particular exceptions or special, unique circumstances that no one would have pointed out unless they actually look into detail to the smallest piece of detail that really changes, that really makes a difference on what is to be decided. But then the AI says, no, we can't do that. No, yes, you should be doing that. You should approve this. You should approve the health insurance. Honestly, why does the United States have this plan of healthcare to begin with? It does. No, not even Republicans would approve of this. It doesn't make any sense. It's just now, of course, there is a cost in the healthcare sector, but you can't just dump the cost onto the patients. They've been through enough already. They're getting surgeries for banana's sake. They shouldn't be paying thousands of dollars or pounds, yuan, actually not yuan, rand, pesos, or whatever currency to get the surgery or treatment that they need. They've been through enough already, they don't need the extra financial cost piled onto them. Madness. Absolute madness. I hope there is a positive outcome that comes from this story, or this research, that maybe eventually, that possibly, healthcare insurance would improve the surgeries and the treatments for patients. Although I do doubt that's likely to happen. But again, the system that's in place, that's the problem. And if there's any way to change it, you know what? I'm all for it. And again, even with the cost that there is, do not pile it on top of the patients. They've been through enough already. They don't need any more struggles, finance related. They've been through enough already. Japan warns of 3-meter high tsunami after magnitude 7.2 earthquake. On December 8th, a 7.2 magnitude quake struck offshore northern Japan, with locals saying everything is still wobbling after the tremor. Japan Meteorological Agency warned of up to 3-meter tsunamis for Hokkaido and Aomori, issuing alerts along the northeast coast. Seismic data show the epicenter near Misawa at about 73 kilometers east-northeast, and the quake struck at a depth of 53.1 kilometers at 2:15 p.m. UTC, USGS reported. Authorities urged residents to evacuate to higher ground following alerts, while one user on Twitter X said, "That was the biggest earthquake I've ever felt." Initial accounts conflicted over magnitude and location, with the United States Geological Survey posting an updated 7.6 magnitude and tsunami warning, while other reports placed the epicenter off the Tokara Island chain, Kagoshima, and said no warning was issued. Now, usually, I'd be worried about countries having to deal with natural disasters and extreme weather. However, with Japan, they have everything under control. They've always prepared themselves for the worst, and this is one of them. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that any fewer lives would be lost in these natural disasters, or at least disasters, as well as reduction in the damage in infrastructure around Japan, but at least preparing yourself for these kind of circumstances at least saves you billions in Japanese yen. No, not just billions, maybe trillions of Japanese yen. But I hope that everyone in Japan that was somewhat affected by the earthquake, that they are okay. I believe they are. And of course, there isn't much damage, which there shouldn't be, because Japan has everything like this prepared, and they always think ahead. They always are like 2 steps ahead in disasters like this. So that's something I like about Japan. They always prepare themselves for the worst. But of course, not all countries have such budgets to prepare themselves for the worst circumstances. But if possible, I think it'd be very useful to take a page out of Japan's book in regards to handling with natural disasters, or at least any disaster whatsoever. And that is it for the episode.